Good morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Eliza for the Nintendo Switch. You may be wondering why this isn't done in video format like I've been doing with my modern reviews. Well, it's mainly because this is another visual novel, but unlike the other visual novels I've reviewed, this has next to no choices until pretty late into the game, and anything that I did show would probably be a spoiler or super boring, so I figured that the screenshots I've gathered will suffice as far as giving you visual representation, and I can talk things out, and if I'm still not clear enough, you can always leave something in the comments section. So just know that my lack of footage was done out of my wish that you guys can go into this not being spoiled. So you are put into the role of a 34-year-old woman named Evelyn who decided to take a job as a proxy counselor, which means that she's working for a company called Eliza, which is the name of an AI therapist who is able to diagnose clients using artificial intelligence. Now, Evelyn's job as the proxy is she has to wear a headset when she goes into her therapy sessions, and the only things she's allowed to say are what Eliza tells her to say. She's not allowed to give her own personal input or say literally anything except what she is prompted to do, which makes for the game being unintentionally really hilarious, although I don't think it's trying to be. As a robot being a therapist, you can probably imagine that that would offer some pretty bizarre wording choices when a more emotional human element is probably what these people need to be hearing. It was really hard for me to connect with a lot of the characters in The Office because, I don't know, it's really hard for me to connect to people's emotions in general, but in this game it seemed like nearly everyone had either an existential crisis, which I don't really get those at all, or they kind of inflicted the problems on themselves and are basically saying, it's all over, it's all over, it's all over. And it's like, why don't you do something to fix the consequences of your mistakes then? Why are you still wallowing in all this miserable, sinful behavior? But what really got to me about Eliza was the fact that, more or less, this is basically a thought experiment of what if the world goes in this direction. What do you think about it? And do you agree or disagree? You get a lot of corporate minds that are doing their usual talking around the subject, and then you get some common people giving their opinions. So overall, the game is designed in such a way that, without trying to spoil too much here, you basically have to make up your own mind. And by the time you do get to the point in the game where you're able to make more decisions than you're able to at first, it becomes really empowering. It feels almost as if you're able to truly become a self-insert protagonist. Because even though Evelyn has her own personality and her own goals and past and established wants and needs, you also have a chance to input yourself into the action as well. And I would say that the way Eliza pulls it off is much more satisfying than I've seen in quite a few visual novels, as a lot of visual novels that I have played tend to make it unclear what ramifications your choice will have in the moment, because maybe you're not entirely sure how the character is going to word it in a way that makes sense with the logic you were thinking. But the good thing about Eliza is that Evelyn always responds word for word exactly what the prompts tell you. So if you want Evelyn to say, what do you mean by that? That's exactly what she's going to say, word for word, so you don't have to be too confused. Overall, there's not really a whole lot of animation here to speak of, so the term visual novel is quite appropriate, as most of the characters, scratch that, all of the characters, are hand-drawn, cardboard-esque cutouts that don't even change their facial expressions. Evelyn has the same bland look the entire game. Like, couldn't you at least smile at least once throughout this entire playthrough? Looking at the same thing over and over again gets really exhausting, especially when the animation is so minimalistic that the only real thing I spotted was a campfire flickering and scenes where Evelyn took a subway. It would shake a little bit. Wow, that's going to blow the world away with the animation there. Now, you might be thinking that this is totally not the game for you if you're not into visual novels. Honestly, I would totally agree. This is definitely the kind of game that I feel like most people would think, why is it not a book? With the way the ending and the second half of the game is structured, I'm glad that it's not a book, as I really like having the illusion of having no choice and then all of a sudden getting choice later. It feels very gratifying, and it's hard to explain why without going in depth about the game's plot. At times it gets a little bit confusing and corporate, wishy-washy, what-if, intuitive-y type of stuff that I normally complain about. But at the same time, I understood enough of it where I felt like I was making a real difference in this fictional community. And that even if I couldn't understand every character's motivations, I could at the very least understand my own and sort of put myself into the scenario and say, okay, well, this is what I would do if I was in this situation. And I felt like the game was generous enough to allow me to have that say, which is definitely not something I can say with most visual novels or most adventure games in general. And you wouldn't think this would be the kind of genre that would pull it off, but Eliza manages somehow. Overall, the characters, even if I don't understand what they're saying, the way they say it is absolutely amazing. The developers really cast some top tier actors, including a couple of big names. And I couldn't think of a single performer that didn't completely just give it all 100% of their effort. These sound like big budget performances that wouldn't be too out of place in a AAA game. Well, okay, maybe they're a little bit more subdued than what you're used to, but then again, a counseling environment isn't quite the same as, say, the world blowing up before you. You can play a version of Hanafuda Solitaire on Evelyn's in-game phone, which also has a couple of other apps, such as checking emails and Snapchats, but honestly, I never figured out how to play Solitaire, nor did it seem particularly interesting, as there are plenty of other ways I can play Solitaire if I'm really bored. Speaking of getting bored, there was a very strange app on that phone. It didn't really have a name. It sort of had Japanese characters plus a Japanese lantern. And in each chapter of the game, it has a different message on the app. One of them is like, what would you like right now? And I thought my game was broken at that point because I tried to just press A and keep moving and be like, okay, let me just answer the question. But apparently it's supposed to be something that you ponder about if the game starts to be too overwhelming. So that seemed kind of useless, but on the other hand, I suppose if you really want to insert yourself into the story, you can do far worse. I also really like how when you're in the counseling sessions, Eliza keeps track of every little fluctuation in the patient's emotions and their heart rate. And so it gives you the impression that the background isn't just there for the sake of being there. The developers really thought about every single line of dialogue and how a robot would be translating it. And it feels very believable. Overall, I think it would be really cool if there was a way that this kind of technology could exist in some kind of application form. Like if you could talk into the Switch and you could, figure out what your heart rate is and what words you're saying are negative or positive. Heck, that would be super cool if my editing skills were good enough to make this into the review. Overall, the controls are pretty simple. Press X to look at Evelyn's phone. Press A to advance the dialogue. There's plenty of options to fiddle around with the music. I eventually ended up turning off the music because it was just a bit too unremarkable for my taste. Sort of like the kind of thing you'd hear in an elevator and then forget about. The ambient sound effects were incredible. And the few times the game used HD rumble was really effective, as the Joy-Cons really felt like Evelyn's phone was vibrating in my hands and gave off that same sense of, oh wow, someone's buzzing me, that I would get from my actual pocket and my real cell phone. So, overall, your enjoyment of Eliza is heavily going to depend on two main factors. One, how much do you like visual novels? And two, are you the type that likes to think about possibilities and corporate nonsense? Or are you the type that prefers to just get to the action and let the future come when it comes? If you're the latter option, you can safely skip Eliza without a second thought. For everyone else, this is a relatively short adventure that packs a lot of punch with its narrative and gives you a degree of freedom in this environment that very few other visual novels can accomplish. You also have the option to rewind the text just in case you can't make heads or tails of the narrative. And you can also select chapters so that you can replay your favorite moments and maybe even see what alternate outcomes can do to change the storyline. Overall, this game didn't come out in 2020, but I would say that this is so subjective to your own personal opinion that I don't think a rating or a number or a letter would be sufficient because it's really all up to the kind of genre you want. But at the end of the day, I would say while this isn't one of the better visual novels, it takes so much time to build up compared to the others I've played, like Zero Escape and Danganronpa. And it also doesn't have too much of a fantastical element. It's much more grounded in the near future than I would like. However, that being said, I also played a far worse visual novel recently, and the fact that this at least allows you some degree of control is very refreshing. The Eliza sessions in particular are really interesting to see, and I'm really excited to see if maybe the developers can take this concept further and maybe make this into an actual application that can be used. So give it a try if you like visual novels. If you don't, skip it. If you like visual novels that make you feel like you're doing more, then you'd probably be better off with something like Zero Escape. However, I do think if you're the type that likes to think about the future of humanity, you could do a lot worse than the conversations here, as most of them are, as far as I can tell, by someone who's not very intuitive, fairly well written, even if my particular brain finds them confusing. So with that, thank you very much for watching, or listening, because this footage is so short. And if there's anything I left out, please let me know in the comments section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and it's way better to have a real friend than a robot. Bye.